November 14, 1994, it started like any other crisp Monday afternoon in Manhattan. But for Linda Carson, the day was shrouded in unease. For 3 days, she hadn't heard from her younger brother, David Carson, or his family. At first, she chalked it up to busy schedules or travel. David was a renowned figure in the American music scene, known for his work as a senior executive at Capitol Records before branching off to open his own classical recording studio in the heart of New York. Silence from him wasn't unusual, but silence from all three of them, David, his wife Elena, and their daughter Rachel, felt off. By mid-afternoon, Linda stood before the glossy mahogany door of apartment 802 in the Atlantic Towers, a luxury 14-story complex overlooking Riverside Park. She knocked. Twice. Then again harder. No answer. She had a key, the one David had given her just in case. But something about the stillness on the other side made her hesitate. She decided instead to notify building management. The building manager, Mr. Jenkins, a man in his 50s with thick glasses and a no-nonsense attitude, agreed to accompany her. At 3:07 p.m., he unlocked the door. It swung open, and almost instantly, a putrid, suffocating stench hit them like a wave. Linda stumbled back, clutching her nose. Jenkins turned away, gagging. The air inside was hot, still, and thick with the unmistakable smell of decay. They stepped back and immediately called 911. When first responders arrived minutes later, they entered with caution and full protective gear. The apartment was impeccably furnished, reflecting a life of class and taste. Mid-century modern furniture, abstract oil paintings, a gleaming Steinway baby grand in the corner. But something was wrong. The lights were off. The windows, usually open to let in the sounds of the city, were sealed tight. It was too quiet, eerily so. As officers made their way down the hall toward the bedrooms, their worst fears were confirmed. In the master bedroom, lying peacefully on top of the bed, was the body of Elena Carson, David's wife of 25 years. Her hands were folded over her abdomen, her face calm, eyes closed. There were no visible wounds, just a faint ligature mark around her neck. Next door, their 22-year-old daughter Rachel was found in her room, in nearly the same position, under a soft blue blanket, as if she had been tucked in before death. Her body, too, bore the signs of strangulation. There were no signs of forced entry. No overturned furniture. No broken glass. And, chillingly, no signs of struggle. And yet, there was no trace of David Carson. By the time NYPD detectives arrived, the scene had already stirred media interest. A man like David, celebrated in the industry, respected for his ear for orchestration and passion for European symphonies, was not just missing, he was the only one missing. The obvious question hung in the air. Had David Carson murdered his family and gone on the run? Detective Aaron Walsh, a seasoned investigator with the NYPD Homicide Unit, was the first to publicly doubt that theory. "It's too clean," she told her partner, Detective Ramon Ochoa, as they reviewed the photos taken by the crime scene team. "If this was rage, where's the rage?" Indeed, it was a tidy crime scene. Not clinical, there were small, humanizing details scattered around. 2 glasses on the coffee table, an open book of Chopin etudes, an unfinished grocery list. The only thing missing, besides David, was the family's white 1993 Cadillac Fleetwood. Walsh took note of the room temperature. It had been turned low. Cool air slows decomposition. Whoever did this had tried to preserve the scene or delay discovery. Forensic pathologists could confirm the cause of death was manual strangulation, but could not pinpoint an exact time of death. Based on decomposition, they estimated it occurred between November 10th and November 13th. That 3-day window proved problematic. David's last confirmed public appearance was on the morning of November 10th, when he had attended a recording session at Carson Audio Studio in Midtown. He left around noon, telling his sound engineer he'd be off-grid for the weekend, headed upstate for some rest. No one had seen him since. Back in the apartment, police discovered something else. There was no blood, no signs of violence, but both Elena and Rachel had chunks of hair removed. Not shaved, not styled, just crudely chopped off. Walsh stared at the strands bundled inside a sealed evidence bag and murmured, "What the hell happened here?" The implication was disturbing. Had someone threatened David by hurting his family first? Had those locks of hair been sent to him as a warning, forcing him to comply with some demand? Was this a murder-suicide? A kidnapping gone wrong? Or something more sinister? The theory that David had simply snapped under financial pressure didn't quite hold water. Despite a recent $300,000 loan, David's finances appeared stable. He had assets, his business was solvent, and he had just returned from a lavish family trip to Vermont. Elena came from a well-off family in Connecticut. Rachel had recently been hired by a major publishing firm in Midtown. They had no known enemies, no legal troubles, no unusual activity on their credit cards. So, why would David kill them? More importantly, where was he now? Outside the apartment, journalists swarmed like flies. Headlines the next morning splashed his face across tabloids. Music mogul vanishes after double murder. David Carson, fugitive or victim? But inside the precinct, the mood was somber. Detective Walsh tapped her pen against a photo of the family, their smiles frozen in time. "This isn't a crime of hate," she whispered. "It's a crime of shame, of despair." Her hunch would prove chillingly accurate. But at that moment, all the police had were two bodies, a missing man, a car no one could find, and a mystery about to stretch far beyond Manhattan. Detective Aaron Walsh stood hunched over a sprawling city map of the northeastern United States, red pins marking each confirmed hotel reservation made under the name David Carson. For locations. For nights. For aliases that weren't aliases at all, just David's full name, used again and again as if he wanted to be found, yet was never truly seen. The media painted him as a mastermind. Manhattan mogul fakes his disappearance. But Aaron saw something different. "He's not hiding," she muttered, tapping a pin over a small town in Pennsylvania. "He's unraveling." The first trace came from Springdale Inn, a modest roadside motel in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. The night of November 10th, barely 12 hours after David was last seen at his studio in Midtown, someone checked in using his driver's license and credit card. The night clerk, a soft-spoken college student, recalled the guest as pale, quiet, polite, wearing large sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low. But when shown David Carson's publicity photo, the clerk hesitated. "Kind of looks like him? But older. Maybe sick." Security footage was no help. The inn's only camera was trained on the parking lot, and the white Cadillac was never seen entering or exiting. The room itself revealed little. The bed was neatly made, the bathroom clean. But the trash can held empty blister packs of sleeping pills, a bottle of ginger ale, and a single piece of torn notebook paper with 4 words. "I am so tired." No blood. No note. No fingerprint anomalies. The man had come and gone like a ghost. The second hotel, Hollow Ridge Lodge in Hartford, Connecticut, yielded more. A housekeeper reported a heavy chemical smell lingering in the room long after checkout. She thought nothing of it until police arrived. Inside a drawer, police found tissues soaked in what they later confirmed was isopropyl alcohol, and a pair of broken reading glasses. Almost like he tried to blind himself, Detective Ochoa guessed, flipping through the logbook. The manager remembered him differently. He didn't talk much. Paid in cash. But he left a tip, generous, like a man who didn't plan to need his money anymore. The Cadillac was again unspotted. But a witness, an elderly couple walking their dog, reported seeing a man fitting David's build sitting in the car near the woods behind the lodge for several hours. "He never left the car," the woman said. "Just stared out the windshield. Motionless." The third reservation was in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, but no one at the Maple Hearth Inn could definitively confirm his identity. The staff were vague. No one remembered seeing the guest's face clearly. It was almost as if he was avoiding being seen. A pattern emerged. David was on the move, circling the northeast like a man orbiting a decision he couldn't face. For Detective Walsh, that decision became obvious. He's not fleeing from justice. He's running from guilt. By the fourth hotel, the journey took a more disturbing turn. In Springfield, Illinois, a cleaning supervisor at the Amberlight Suites reported a room that had been left in an unusual state. The air was stale, with the odor of mildew and something more human. The mattress was stripped, yet stains remained beneath. A blue electrical cord lay coiled near the desk, and the mirror had been removed from the wall entirely. The reservation was under David Carson. The license used matched his. But again, the man seen entering did not resemble the photos. When the officer showed the supervisor an image of David a few years prior, she frowned. Not quite him. This guy looked hollow. Like someone wearing the same skin, but with the light gone out behind his eyes. CCTV footage from a gas station 5 blocks away, timestamped 6:12 a.m. on November 15th, showed a man in a heavy coat and baseball cap buying cigarettes and aspirin. He moved with slow, careful steps. In the background, a white Cadillac idled by the curb. The plate matched David Carson's. Back in Manhattan, the investigation hit a frustrating wall. Public speculation grew wilder by the day. Theories ranged from David was kidnapped and forced to fund a criminal syndicate. The family faked their own deaths for life insurance. It was all a grand social experiment or performance art. But the detectives knew better. They returned to the apartment, reviewing phone records, notebooks, banking transactions. One officer found something peculiar on David's office desk, a printed receipt for a rental cello dated October 9th. The cello was never found. Why rent a cello? Joe asked. He already owned 3. But Walsh saw the receipt differently. Maybe it was never about the instrument. Maybe he needed to feel connected. Still part of the music. Still useful. Meanwhile, forensic analysts uncovered another clue, a partial print from one of the hair bundles found in Rachel's room. It matched Elena, not David. It appeared she had cut a piece of her daughter's hair, willingly, not forcefully. Under her fingernails, fragments of conditioner and fine scissors oil were detected. Why would she do that? Walsh wondered. Then it clicked. This wasn't a symbolic act by a killer, it was part of a plan. A ritual. Something shared. Had David told them what he planned? Had they agreed? The thought sent chills through the entire task force. And then, 6 days after the bodies were found, the case took its final turn. A call came in from a small boutique hotel in Asheville, North Carolina, David's hometown. A housekeeper had found a body in room 203, suspended from a ceiling beam, a chair overturned nearby. The guest had checked in under his real name. When officers arrived, they found David Carson at last. He was gaunt, pale, with deep-set eyes and untrimmed facial hair. He wore a dark sweater and khakis, and by his feet was a cassette recorder, still in the eject position. No note, no last will, just the sound of silence. Until they pressed play. The room was cold. Not from the temperature, but from what it held. Room 203 of the Elmwood Inn in Asheville, North Carolina, was nondescript. Beige carpet. A plain wooden desk. A cheap lamp with a crooked shade. Yet, in that room, on the morning of November 19, 1994, the final chapter of one family's quiet disintegration came to light. David Carson, 47, was found hanging from the exposed ceiling beam. The noose was fashioned from a nylon cord, likely taken from the motel's laundry room. Beneath him sat a single wooden chair, tipped over, one leg broken from impact. By his feet, a black cassette recorder, lid popped open, the tape fully rewound. Detective Erin Walsh arrived at the scene just after sunrise. She didn't speak when she entered. No need. The body said enough. But it was the cassette that everyone would remember. The tape was 41 minutes long. No music. No soundtrack. Just David's voice, calm, deliberate, occasionally trembling, but unmistakably lucid. The first words were simple. If you're hearing this, I'm already gone. Then silence. Not for long. I didn't know how to say it. To Elena. To Rachel. To anyone. I spent so long building this idea of who I was. I forgot how to admit I was failing. He spoke about his career, how, for years, he had risen through the ranks at Capitol Records, producing platinum albums, launching artists, sitting in boardrooms filled with applause and champagne. But beneath it all, he longed for something purer. Something real. I fell in love with classical music in college. Not the kind that sells. The kind that requires silence and listening. That passion led him to walk away from Capitol Records at the peak of his power. He cashed in his stock options, rented a midtown studio, and began producing live analog recordings of chamber orchestras, string quartets, and solo pianists. It wasn't profitable. Not really. But it was mine. Then came the recession. Attendance dropped. Studios raised rates. Pressing costs soared. Within 2 years, he was hemorrhaging money. Still, he didn't tell Elena. Didn't tell Rachel. Instead, he took out loans, from banks, from private lenders, even from friends. I thought I could fix it. Just one successful release. One breakout performance. One tour that would turn it all around. But it never came. And worse, he couldn't let go. He refused to pivot to pop or crossover albums. He refused to sell out. I couldn't compromise the music, but I compromised everything else. As the tape continued, it became clear, David didn't just feel like a failure. He felt like a fraud. To the world, I was still that polished man in the suit. But at night, I sat in the dark with a ledger I couldn't balance. I told myself I was protecting my family. But I was only protecting my pride. His voice cracked for the first time. Elena knew. Maybe not the numbers. But she saw it. She felt it. She asked me once if I still believed in what I was doing. I told her yes. I lied. Then came the most heartbreaking part. David described in painful detail how he came to believe the only honorable solution was for them to leave together. He never used the word murder. Never said kill. But the implication was hauntingly clear. I couldn't bear the shame of dragging them down with me. I thought, maybe if I did it gently in their sleep, they wouldn't feel anything. He had drugged them. Not a lethal dose, just enough to keep them calm. Then he waited. Then he acted. Elena went first. She didn't struggle. I think part of her knew. Rachel, he said, was harder. She stirred. Opened her eyes. Said, "Daddy?" The tape went silent for nearly a full minute at that moment. When David spoke again, his voice had changed, rougher, distant. That was when I broke. I couldn't go through with the rest. I couldn't do it to myself. He fled. Took the car. Drove. The days that followed were a blur of highways and motel rooms. He described the night in Pennsylvania, how he tried to overdose on sleeping pills but vomited them up. The night in Illinois, where he strung the cord but couldn't kick the chair. The bottle of scotch in Hartford he poured down the sink before touching it. I kept hoping someone would find me. Stop me. Arrest me. Anything. But no one came. The country was too big. He was too good at being invisible. And then his final words. If I just told them. If I just said the truth. Maybe they would have forgiven me. Maybe they would have helped. But I was too proud. Too afraid. Now it's too late. I don't want redemption. I don't deserve peace. But if you're listening, please tell Rachel's story. Tell Elena's. They deserved better than me. When the tape ended, the room was silent. Detective Walsh didn't speak. Ochoa simply reached over and turned off the player. Outside, the sun had risen fully, casting soft gold across the quiet Asheville skyline. A manhunt that had spanned 5 states ended not with handcuffs or headlines, but with a whisper. Back in Manhattan, Elena's family refused to bury David with his wife and daughter. Rachel and Elena were laid to rest together at Forest Hill Cemetery. David was cremated, his ashes unclaimed. The press moved on. The headlines faded. But for Detective Erin Walsh, the case never left her. She would later describe the tape as the most honest lie I'd ever heard. 3 weeks after David Carson's death, the city returned to its rhythm. Manhattan didn't slow down for tragedy. The subway still roared, neon still blinked, and the music industry continued churning out hits. But inside a modest conference room at NYPD's 20th Precinct, Detective Erin Walsh wasn't ready to move on. On the wall was a case board, still intact, strings connecting names, photos, locations, receipts. Most of it had been resolved. But to Walsh, solved didn't mean understood. She stared at a photo of Rachel Carson, taken at her college graduation. She was smiling, arm in arm with Elena, wearing a navy dress and holding her diploma like a trophy. No one could have guessed she would die 3 months later, silently, without a mark of resistance. That's what bothered Walsh most. Why didn't they run? Why didn't they scream? Why didn't they fight back? The coroner's report had confirmed traces of zolpidem, a sedative found in both Elena and Rachel's systems. It wasn't a lethal dose, just enough to render them calm, drowsy, perhaps even unaware of what was happening. But there was no evidence of force. No bruises, no signs of restraint. And the scissors used to cut locks of their hair? Found in the bathroom drawer, wiped clean, but placed neatly on a folded hand towel. Walsh revisited the forensic photos, studying the rooms again. In Rachel's bedroom, a small vase of fresh daisies still stood on the nightstand. Her favorite journal, bound in green leather, rested beside it. When the pages were examined, one entry stood out. It was dated November 9th, just 1 day before she died. Dad's been quiet. More than usual. He looks tired, like something's pulling him down from the inside. Mom says he's just working too hard, but I don't think that's it. I hope he knows he can talk to us. Whatever it is, we're here. The last line had been underlined twice. We're here. Walsh closed the file. Her hands were shaking. Rachel had sensed it. Elena probably had too. Maybe they didn't know the full scope, but they felt the emotional fracture, sensed the slow implosion of a man hiding behind a facade of control. That's the thing about silence. It doesn't announce itself. It seeps in like cold air under a locked door. You don't notice it until it's all around you. The more Walsh learned about the Carson family, the more the tragedy deepened. Elena wasn't just a wife. She had given up her career in nonprofit fundraising to raise Rachel and support David's dream. Friends described her as graceful, empathetic, the kind of person who made you feel better just by being in the room. Rachel, their only child, had graduated magna cum laude from NYU with a degree in publishing. She had just accepted a job offer from a major imprint under Penguin Random House. She was going to edit children's books, her college roommate said. She had this belief that stories could heal people. There was no history of domestic abuse. No violent behavior. No mental health diagnosis. The Carsons weren't a perfect family, but they were close. And that, Walsh realized, was the hardest part to accept. Because closeness without honesty is just proximity. In an interview weeks later, one of David's former business partners recounted a moment that haunted him. It was about a month before the murders. David had been unusually quiet during a recording session, distracted. When asked what was wrong, he replied, "I'm just tired of pretending everything's fine." The partner didn't press. "I thought he was just having a rough week," he said. "If I had known." But that's how these things go. Everyone assumes someone else will ask the hard questions. Someone else will notice. Someone else will act. Detective Walsh gave a short presentation at a community mental health seminar the following spring. She didn't use the Carsons' names, out of respect for the surviving relatives, but she did quote from David's tape. "If I'd just said the truth, maybe they would have forgiven me." She paused after reading it. Then she looked up and said, "Maybe they already had. He just didn't believe he deserved it." In the months following the case, Walsh helped initiate a quiet project within the department, a protocol for early intervention referrals in cases involving unusual financial stress, social withdrawal, or emotional shifts in otherwise stable individuals. The idea wasn't to criminalize suffering. It was to catch the quiet ones. The ones who didn't raise their hands. The ones who wrote, "I'm just tired," on scraps of paper in motel trash cans. Back at the Carson apartment, time stood still. The building's management renovated the unit, but the neighbors knew. No one wanted to live there. The Steinway piano was removed, sold at auction. The books, the furniture, even the curtains, boxed and donated. Only one item remained unclaimed, a framed photo of the Carsons, taken in Central Park the previous spring. It sat behind a dusty counter at a downtown consignment store. 3 smiling faces. Frozen in joy. And no one to take it home. Midtown Manhattan, a few blocks from the rustling buzz of Times Square, sat a narrow brick building wedged between a Korean noodle shop and a discount shoe store. Above its modest black awning, barely noticeable to passers-by, were the gold serif letters, Carson Audio Studios. After David Carson's death, the studio sat shuttered for weeks. No clients. No engineers. No sound. Just the dim hum of city traffic outside and the silence of abandoned ambition within. Until one day in early December, Detective Aaron Walsh stood outside its door, key in hand. The lock clicked open with a reluctant twist. Inside, the air was musty with age, dust, and faded dreams. The space was smaller than she'd imagined, 2 recording booths, a mixing desk, shelves of analog gear. In the corner stood a tall metal rack of reel-to-reel tapes, each labeled in neat, looping cursive. She didn't know what she was looking for. Closure, maybe? Or insight? Or just the human part of David Carson that hadn't made it into the police report. What she found was far more than she expected. There were 3 unfinished projects on the studio's main tracking computer. Each bore Rachel Carson's initials. The first, RC Schumann Edit. The second, RC Narration Test. The third, RC Final Compilation Draft. Detective Walsh pressed play. Rachel's voice filled the speakers, soft, warm, slightly unsure, but full of intent. This is the story of a melody that never needed words, yet spoke louder than silence. It was a podcast, or something like it. A personal project, her voice layered over classical compositions. She was telling the story of her father's studio, their shared love for music, her childhood memories of falling asleep to Chopin nocturnes playing softly through the walls. It was stunning and heartbreaking. Walsh sat in the listening chair, headphones on, eyes closed. As Rachel's voice continued, the background swelled with a quiet piano sonata, imperfectly recorded but haunting in its rawness. She spoke of David's belief that music was where truth lived, how he once said that a single chord could say what 10,000 words never could. Then, near the end, Rachel's voice cracked ever so slightly. "Dad, if you're listening, I hope this place brings you peace again. I hope I can help." The file cut off mid-note. Walsh removed the headphones and sat still for a moment, letting the silence return. This wasn't just a studio. It was their sanctuary, their bond, their shared language. And now, it was a mausoleum of memories. She scanned the shelves. On one, she found a weathered notebook titled, Session Notes, Spring 1994. Inside were David's thoughts in sprawling cursive, everything from mic placements to reflections on each artist he recorded. One entry read, "Rachel's voice is growing stronger. She's no longer reading lines. She's speaking truth. I see her. She's becoming herself. I think I'm the one holding her back." Another, "Elena says I'm too hard on myself. But I'm not hard enough. I've led us to the edge. And they're following me because they trust me." And then this, "I want to believe there's still time to turn this around. But every note I record lately feels like a goodbye." Walsh closed the book, holding it to her chest like something sacred. Later that week, she contacted Elena's sister, Margaret Holland, who had inherited the estate. Margaret was cool at first, guarded. But when Walsh told her about the audio files, her voice softened. "I didn't know Rachel was recording anything," Margaret said. "She never said a word." Walsh offered to hand over the digital files. But Margaret hesitated. "Maybe it's better this way. Let it stay unfinished." Yet something about that didn't sit right with Walsh. The recordings weren't just fragments of a lost dream, they were evidence of who the Carsons really were, not just victims of silence, but carriers of beauty, of meaning, of something more than despair. So Walsh made a quiet decision. She contacted a friend at a local arts nonprofit and arranged for the files to be archived. Not published, not shared, just preserved. She titled the project, Echoes, the Carson Recordings. A few weeks later, a handwritten letter arrived at the 20th Precinct. It was from Margaret. "Detective Walsh, I changed my mind. If anything in those recordings can help one person realize that silence is not strength, then maybe some good can still come of all this. Thank you." On a quiet Sunday afternoon, the nonprofit held a small private listening session. The room was filled with just a dozen people, counselors, music teachers, social workers, and a few young artists. They sat in silence as Rachel's voice played from a simple set of speakers, weaving memories and melodies together into a gentle, intimate tapestry. When it ended, no one applauded. They just listened. And that, perhaps, was the point. Outside, the city moved on as it always does. Taxis honked. Phones buzzed. Someone shouted for a cab on 7th Avenue. But inside that small room, the echo of a family, flawed, beautiful, broken, and real, lingered in the air. Still unfinished. Still meaningful. Still heard. Late December. A light snow had fallen overnight, dusting the headstones of Forest Hill Cemetery in northern Manhattan with a soft, powdery veil. The city, ever in motion, seemed to slow its pace for a moment. Even the wind moved more gently, as if in reverence. 2 side-by-side gravestones stood among the quiet. The first bore the name, Elena Carson, 1950 to 1994. Beloved wife and mother. Her warmth changed every room. And beside it, Rachel Elena Carson, 1972 to 1994. Daughter, dreamer, storyteller. She heard music in everything. Fresh flowers had been laid that morning. Pale white lilies and soft blue hydrangeas, tied together with a simple silk ribbon. No name card. Just silence. A few feet away, under the bare branch of a skeletal elm tree, a third grave sat separate. Smaller. Quieter. The grass around it still bore the marks of recent digging. David Michael Carson, 1947 to 1994. Husband, father, composer. Let the unfinished song remain. There were no flowers here. Just snow. The separation was not accidental. After David's suicide and the contents of his confession tape became public, Elena's sister, Margaret Holland, made a clear decision. She would not allow him to be buried with the 2 women he had taken from her. I don't care what he was going through, she told Detective Walsh. He killed them. Whatever his pain was, it doesn't erase that. David's cremated remains had been rejected by Elena's family. No one from the Carson lineage stepped forward to claim them either. It was a local funeral director, an acquaintance of David's from his Capitol Records days, who quietly arranged for the 3rd grave. Out of duty. Out of compassion. Or maybe just to give the man a final place to rest, however distant from the family he had once built. Detective Walsh didn't attend the burial. But a week later, she came alone, dressed in a heavy wool coat and scarf, her breath visible in the winter air. She stood between the 2 grave plots and felt, for the first time, the full weight of the space between them. 3 lives. 1 tragedy. Divided not just by death, but by judgment. It wasn't her place to disagree with the decision. Margaret's grief was raw and righteous. But still, she wondered, was David's punishment complete? Was there any version of justice that could match what had already been lost? She knelt and brushed snow off Rachel's stone, her gloved hand lingering on the engraving. She heard music in everything. She was the best of them, Walsh whispered. The one who tried. A few feet away, a lone figure watched from the cemetery road. Alan Reese, David's former recording engineer, had come late, on purpose. He didn't want to interrupt the detective. He didn't know her. But he had worked with David for over a decade. And though he hadn't seen him in the final year of his life, he had read every headline. Mourned alone. He approached only after Walsh had stepped back toward her car. I used to clean that damn studio every Friday night, he said quietly, motioning toward the grave. He wouldn't let anyone else dust the tape deck. Walsh smiled faintly. Perfectionist. Obsessive, Alan replied. But also gentle. Especially with her. He nodded toward Rachel's grave. She was everything to him. I don't think he knew how to be without her. What troubled Alan most wasn't the act of the murders, tragic as they were, it was the isolation that preceded them. The empty chairs in the control room. The unreturned calls. The long silences in sessions where once there had been spirited debate about microphones and Mahler. He was already gone, Alan said. Long before that night. Like he'd faded out, just a shadow moving around the studio. Walsh nodded. She had seen that too. In the hotels. The journal entries. The parking lot cameras. David hadn't fled justice. He had drifted. From himself, from his family, from the man he once was. The public's interest in the Carson case faded with the turn of the new year. Other headlines rose to replace it: scandals, elections, celebrity mishaps. The story was reduced to a Wikipedia footnote, a 5-minute true crime podcast, a tabloid rerun titled, "The Family That Slept and Never Woke." But for those who knew them, Margaret, Alan, the studio interns, the musicians who once played under David's guidance, it wasn't so simple. They remembered the warmth of Elena's laughter echoing through the studio kitchen. They remembered Rachel curled up on a couch with headphones, scribbling in her notebook. They remembered David's eyes lighting up when a final take felt right. And they remembered how none of them saw it coming. At the precinct, Walsh kept the case file open on her desk longer than usual. Not because there was anything left to investigate, but because she didn't want to close it. Not yet. Inside, she kept a photo of the Carson family, not the one from Central Park, but a candid Polaroid Alan had shared. It showed all three seated on the studio couch, elbows touching, laughing at something out of frame. It was imperfect. Blurry. The lighting was off. But it was human. It was real. Spring returned slowly to Manhattan. Trees along Central Park West regained their color, and city sidewalks echoed with the rhythm of daily life, rushing footsteps, horns, chatter, laughter. The world moved on. It always did. But inside a second-floor archive room at the New York City Center for Audio Preservation, a quiet project lived on, quiet, but not forgotten. Echoes, the Carson recordings, was never officially announced. There was no press release. No publicity campaign. Just a catalog number, a digital vault, and a silent commitment to memory. Housed within that archive were three things. A restored version of Rachel Carson's narration project. David Carson's handwritten session notes. The audio confession found in the motel in Asheville. But more than data, it was a story sealed in sound, raw, fragmented, imperfect, and human. Archivist Leo Bramley, a soft-spoken former musician in his 60s, was tasked with organizing the files. He never knew the Carsons personally, but as he listened to their voices, Rachel's tender introspection, David's weary apologies, he found himself pausing often, eyes closed, as if trying to hear something that wasn't there. It's not about guilt or innocence, he later told a colleague. It's about what wasn't said in time. He made sure the digital files were encoded carefully, backed up twice, and labeled without sensationalism. He didn't want the Carsons to be remembered as a crime. He wanted them to be remembered as people. Meanwhile, Margaret Holland, Elena's sister, had begun volunteering with a nonprofit focused on crisis prevention in high-achieving families. She gave talks. Quiet ones. Off-record. No names. No headlines. But in each, she would say the same phrase. Love without honesty is like a song without air. It dies in silence. She didn't forgive David. Not completely. Maybe never. But she no longer needed vengeance to survive. Instead, she tried to build something in the ruins. Something Rachel would have been proud of. In Midtown, the former Carson Audio Studios was eventually rented out to a young jazz composer and her band. They kept the name. It felt right, she said. Like leaving it behind would be the wrong kind of silence. They discovered Rachel's journal tucked behind a shelf during renovations, left behind by accident or fate. Inside was a single phrase written in bold letters on the back cover. Even broken songs deserve to be heard. They framed it. It hangs by the control booth to this day. As for Detective Erin Walsh, she moved to a new assignment a year later, transferring to a community liaison unit focused on early intervention and suicide prevention. She said the Carson case never left her. It simply changed her lens. She kept a copy of Rachel's recording on her personal drive. Not to relive the case, but to remind herself of something Rachel had said. Sometimes the people who seem the strongest are the ones praying you'll notice they're not. In one interview years later, when asked what she remembered most, Walsh didn't mention the scene, the tape, or the crime. Just said, I remember how much they loved each other, and how little they said when it mattered most. The Carson case became more than a tragedy. It became a reflection on pressure, on silence, on pride and perception. It asked questions that society still struggles to answer. How do we define failure in a world obsessed with success? Why do we wait to speak until it's too late? What would we say if we knew the moment we had was our last? And it reminded people that sometimes the strongest love can go unheard, buried beneath the weight of fear, shame, and the expectations we place on ourselves. In the end, what remained wasn't the crime. It was the music, the laughter between sessions, the softness in Rachel's voice, the scribbled notes in David's margins, the stillness Elena carried into every room, and a single line whispered through a cheap pair of studio headphones. I hope this place brings you peace again. In the silence that followed, there was no applause. But somewhere in that pause, someone heard it. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.